Peter Becker e Jonathan Turrel, cofondatori di Criterion. Per noi Cineteche e Cinema Ritrovato è un vero onore avere i cofondatori di Criterion, che sono un caso assolutamente straordinario di editori che hanno imposto una qualità a un mercato internazionale. Ecco, credo che i meriti di Criterion siano veramente molteplici. Ci hanno fatto conoscere dei DVD e dei Blu-ray in versioni straordinarie, con restauri perfetti, con extra ricchissimi, con un lavoro anche sul web di grande qualità e anche con la capacità di rinnovare continuamente questa qualità, cioè di riuscire sempre a trovare qualcosa che ci sorprende e che non conoscevamo, anche dei film che abbiamo più amato. Ecco, per tutto questo gli siamo molto grati e facciamo molti auguri che questo lavoro possa ancora continuare. Grazie.
I'd like to thank you to Gianluca and also Peter Van Block and everyone here at Cinetech Bologna and at Cinema Ritrovato who've been so kind to us for so long. You know, what Criterion does is very much a collaborative effort, and the people that are in this room are many of our collaborators, scholars and restorers, and we really couldn't do it without all the people who gather here every year. So for us, this is a real homecoming, and to be honored here in this way is really very meaningful for me, and I'm very, very grateful. And,
thank you. It sounds even more wonderful to be praised in a language you don't understand. You don't ever say, no, that's not true.
Well, I can say one thing that isn't true, which is that John and I together are not actually co-founders. It's a minor point, but it's not insignificant. The company was founded in California, originally by yes, we're immediately going to get into the history.
Not really, but
well, no, John has been there since the beginning. I didn't come in until 1993. We've run the company together ever since then, but I certainly can't take a role as a founder. John is a virtual founder, I would say.
I think I go back to sort of 83, 84 days, so I was there. I actually came, the first two things that Criterion did were Laserdiscs of Citizen Kane and Game Con. And Janice got involved, and I got involved right after those two. And 3, 4, and 5 were the ones that I was started to work with, which were Lady Vanish's 39 Steps and Third Man.
So some of our colleagues have prepared some things that we can show you and give you a little bit of sense of what we're up to. The first thing that I actually want to show you was not made by us, but by one of the very dedicated Criterion fans out there. Somebody went and put together a 2.5-minute reel that includes virtually everything in the Criterion Collection up until the moment that he made the piece, which was a few months ago. So it's relatively recent, and I think it gives a good sense of what the company's been up to for the last now 30 years. So if we can roll that first clip, and I think you'll enjoy spotting films that you love and maybe films that you don't recognize. So let's do that. And that concludes our presentation. As you can imagine, it's a great honor to sit up and be able. It's so great to see so many friendly faces. It's a great honor to be able to sit here and represent a library of films like that, and I think that has always been the core of the Criterion mission and brand. We've always tried to make the films come first. The film library. John, if you want to speak about this a little bit, but the film library was an extension of the mission that both of our fathers were engaged in for many years in Janus Films, which had grown quite an amazing collection of international classic films before. What do you want to? Closer. Like that. You like that better? Okay. It was an extension of what Janus Films had been doing, that it had built up an amazing collection of international classic films, and it was for that reason that I think that the original couple, Bob and Lean Stein, who had been working on Laserdiscs in Los Angeles, first came to Janus, I think, to license pictures.
I think so. When Janus, over the years, licensed the movies and acquired the rights to the movies, I think we never really cared about the medium. It was always the movies themselves, and Janus really started out sort of as a non-theatrical distributor and bringing these films to college campuses on 16 millimeter, and then into the theatrical business a little bit, and then television licensing. We did a huge deal with PBS actually in the 70s to bring these movies to television in the United States for the first time without commercials and with subtitles. And then, a sort of natural outgrowth of that was the beginning of home video, which was 1981 in the United States, and then Criterion in 1983. The two partners really who came to New York to see me were Bob Stein and Roger Smith, and Roger had worked at Warner's for many years. And they came and they said, we want these movies, and I sort of didn't get what they were doing, but they showed me Citizen Kane. And they went through the opening scene step by step, which you could do on CAV Laserdisc at the time, and they said, just look at the window in the opening shot, and it never moves. And Orson Welles would zoom into the castle, but the light in the window never changed. And I was hooked. This was a new way and a different way of looking at movies, and I think that's how Janus got involved.
I will say, one of the fun things about being the steward of a legacy that goes back as far as the Janus Films legacy does. Janus Films was founded in 1956. And we have the file cabinets that go all the way back to the first contracts and all of the original marketing materials. And one thing that I can say is that the tradition of innovative ideas about how to get films out in front of people way predates us. I mean, I found a brochure for the Janus Choral Society. I'm not exactly sure what that was, but it was some idea that was going to connect us through choral societies. There were ways that there were all kinds of support materials for student film societies. There were all kinds of ways that Janus, all the way along, had really worked very hard to try to get really interesting films in front of larger and larger audiences. And one thing John said earlier, I think, is something that I repeat ad infinitum, which is that Criterion is a company that is driven by a mission, not by a medium. And the mission, very simply, is to present great films from around the world as their makers would want them seen, in editions that will encourage repeated viewing and deepen the appreciation of film art. And so that mission has actually, in some ways, made our jobs very easy, because we just have to ask ourselves, how do you do that? Let's do that. And sticking to that mission has made it, that's been the key to building the brand. I think, one of the ways that you can see that the mission hasn't changed, and it really hasn't changed, is that the next thing that we want to show is something that we made 10 years ago. Peter Bogdanovich was kind enough to record this piece for us, and we went to go put together some samples of what we do, and Kim Hendrickson, our lead producer, went through everything and said, this piece that we made for Telluride is really good, let's show that. So the only thing wrong with this piece is that since that time, our branding has changed. You won't see the C, you'll see our old branding on anything that appears, but other than that, the mission is the same, and the idea of what we've been doing hasn't really changed at all. And I think it's as good a way as any of showing what we've been up to and what we set out to do in the first place. So if we could roll that second clip from the midpoint.
For more than 20 years, the Criterion Collection has dedicated itself to changing the way people look at movies at home. Beginning in 1984 with the Laserdisc of Citizen Kane, Criterion set out to make a curated collection, so each release was numbered on the spine. Orson Welles' masterpiece was number 1. More than a decade before DVD, Criterion's Kane was a full-blown special edition with storyboards, script comparisons, and behind-the-scenes material, creating a virtual film school in a box. The idea was to publish the greatest films from around the world under a single banner, and use technology to create supplements that would deepen home viewers' appreciation of the films they love best. One of Criterion's earliest innovations was the commentary track. Here's how the first one started.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Ronald Haver, and I'm here to do something which we feel is rather unique. I'm going to take you on a lecture tour of King Kong.
No one had ever recorded a shot-by-shot audio essay before.
Now here again, we have one of the first uses of miniature projection. Now this translucent movie screen, believe it or not, was made up of condoms. One of the engineers was telling me that he kept going into the drugstore to buy all these condoms, and the guy couldn't figure out why he kept buying them by the gross.
Over the years, the company has built a library of audio commentaries from important film critics and scholars on the classics of world cinema. Before long, Criterion recognized that this new medium could also be a record of filmmakers' own thoughts. The first was director Michael Powell, half of the famous team of Powell and Pressburger. The interviewer was none other than Martin Scorsese.
I'm Martin Scorsese, and Black Narcissus is one of the Powell Pressburger masterpieces I'm going to tell you about, along with Michael Powell, who'll be joining us shortly to talk about the film from the director's point of view.
This is Michael Powell speaking and dreaming about Black Narcissus.
Scorsese also recorded Criterion commentaries on a number of his own films, including Raging Bull.
I literally got shot-by-shot breakdown of the shower scene in Psycho, and really got my original storyboards for this one sequence, shot-by-shot with the shower sequence in Psycho, and shot it in that order. The shots of the camera right on the edge of the glove, that was suggested by Sam Fuller, who said, put the lens in his fist.
Scorsese was followed by a string of important contemporary filmmakers who discussed their own work and the films they are passionate about. Part of what attracts filmmakers to Criterion is the selection of films.
Marcel Carné's Children of Paradise, which I actually prefer to say Les Enfants du Paradis, it shows how sophisticated I am, is one of those films, it seemed to me, that we'll never see again.
But it was the company's insistence on quality that drew even the most exacting filmmakers. From the beginning, Criterion committed to presenting every film as it was meant to be seen, inviting directors and cinematographers to supervise the transfers of their work, and presenting every film in its proper aspect ratio. This demonstration from Godard's Contempt shows how much picture was lost in the panning and scanning of the film in its original home video release. Sometimes doing it right meant creating a version of the film that had never been seen before, restoring director's cuts for the first time on home video.
He's got away from us, Jack. Afraid you're right, Mr. Hellman.
In my own case, I'd always wanted to add 6 or 7 minutes to the last picture show. Criterion collectors know when a disc is director approved that the filmmaker has literally signed off on the release. The company has led the way in the digital restoration of classic films, repairing visible film damage, returning the original color to faded prints, and adding new dimension to soundtracks. The company continues to raise the bar for itself, whether exploring the films and philosophy of Gian Cassavetes.
John saw the ruins, and he saw them with a clarity that the rest of us would find unbearable.
Looking at the controversial mix of art, politics, and terrorism in the Battle of Algiers.
The thing that really disturbed me about the movie, watching it again, was the parallel to the war on Al-Qaeda.
Or creating multi-disc editions of the same story as seen by different directors. For example, Robert Siodmak's 1946 version of Hemingway's The Killers, alongside Don Siegel's from 1964. Jean Renoir's The Lower Depth from 1936, based on the Gorky play, and Akira Kurosawa's version from 1957. Regardless of the medium, from Laserdisc through DVD to whatever comes next, Criterion's mission remains the same: to present and preserve our film heritage, not locked away in vaults, but in easy reach on the shelves of Criterion collectors.
I mean, it's funny, we really are saying the same thing 10 years later. I'm afraid it's, there's no news here today. I'm still using the same language that we've been using since then. And I think to stray from that mission would be to step away from what has made the brand successful for viewers everywhere. I think what people have counted on us for is to just stick to that idea and to those ideals and do our best to uphold them. And you know, there are times certainly when we feel a little bit cursed by our own brand, because it would be nice to be able to take shortcuts now and then. But for the most part, we come to our senses within about a minute or two, because we realize that the only thing that people are really counting on us to do is to do what we say we're going to do, which is what we were talking about then and what we're still talking about now. You want to throw in there?
No, I think that's. I want to tell a little story.
That's good. The story's good.
The story's good. Peter and I both, owe a tremendous really debt to our parents or our fathers in this. That they started Janus, or they bought Janus from a friend of Peter's father in the mid-'60s. And my father was a filmmaker and a storyteller. And he was making a film about Hal Roach. And he would, as he got sick, it sort of stopped and he was never going to finish it, but he had gotten King Vidor to interview Hal Roach. And he sat down and he wrote the questions, and one of the questions that he wrote for King was to ask Hal, when you were making these movies and finding these stars, finding Harold Lloyd or Little Rascals, did you ever think that what you were doing was art? And Hal Roach answered very quickly, no, I'm just doing entertainment and it wasn't art. And King Vidor, as I'm told the story, I haven't heard it, turned to the camera and said, you know what, I'd like to answer that as a director. And he turned and he said, I'd like to think that when I made The Crowd or made my movies, that I was in fact thinking of what I was doing as art. And he paused for a minute, and he said, no, it's not true. If it was, I would have saved a print. And I think that's, you know, and it was that sort of, it's learning from that I think what we are dealing with is art. And that what we, Peter used the word before, but it's how to present art in a good way, and not just put it in a gallery somewhere, but add something to it to make people be able to enjoy it for a long period of time. And whether it started with laser, or we're going to talk about it a little bit later, and now we're really struggling on how to take that experience into the online world, because it's very real and it's here.
It's a great story. The thing that we're often kind of amazed by is the state that film was in or has been in, you know, and the degree to which it's been transformed recently. I mean, when we talk about what Davide and L'immagine ritrovata is doing here, or what we're doing in our lab in New York, or what's happening in all of our partners' companies' labs now, increasingly film restoration has really taken a different place in the world. It's now, it would now be surprising if somebody didn't take care of a piece of film. But that wasn't the case even 10 years ago and 20 years ago when I started, and certainly not when John started. And you know, I think of things like recently there was an archive of hundreds and hundreds of prints that had belonged to a big library in the States, Audio Brandon Library, and the company had long since gone out of business, and it had been passed into hands after hands after hands. And we finally got a quick notice that all these prints were going to get destroyed. And did we want them? All you have to do is pay the bill. So we thought, well, we don't even really know what's in there, but it's probably worth paying that bill. And I think, you know, the thing that's amazing to me now is that story is such a rarity. I mean, right now I think that people are so attuned to it. Things have changed so much, and the expectations are so different, and the expectations of quality are so different. And so I constantly think of young viewers now who have access to films at their fingertips, or literally online at their fingertips, that you would have had to wait potentially years to come around to your local art house. And now everybody has access to them. And the expectations that they have of the quality of what those images are going to be, you know, to the point where we have people who are ready to, first among them, to complain that something looks too clean, or too this, or too restored, or whatever it is, you know. And it's just such a luxury that we have. I just wanted to sort of say that, you know, out loud. I think it is an incredible luxury to live in an age when we can see so many amazing films that were so rare and are now so much more in reach and are so much better taken care of. So this idea that King Vidor didn't save a print, I mean, it's just unthinkable. But that's the way it was. I mean, everybody's heard Serge Bromberg do his amazing, you know, performances, and where he talks about people digging holes and filling them with nitrate and setting them on fire. Just unthinkable. Geez, I mean, I think. Do you want to move on to restoration, or for a moment? That we have a piece that when we published our first Laserdisc of Seventh Seal, we got these great reviews, and everybody said, "Oh, this looks unimaginably good." And we looked at this master when we went to make our first DVD, and it really didn't look unimaginably good at all. It really didn't look good at all. And then we did a restoration for DVD, and we were very proud of it. We made a very kind of proud restoration demonstration, which we put on the disc. And subsequently, Svenska's done a restoration, big 4K restoration, which is the basis of our current Blu-ray. And I just thought it would be interesting for 1 second to see that original restoration demonstration, which was made in, I think must have been about 1997, looking back at a master that was made in 1987 and comparing it to what's available now, just to give a sense of what happened.
And it's fascinating. And I think what to me is always the neat is because every time you do it, you think we're done.
Yeah.
That okay, we have reached the height that we won't go any further.
Exactly. But somehow there's always more. So if we could run that next little bit, that would be great.
Vänta ett ögonblick.
Så säger ni alla. Men jag lämnar inga uppskov.
Du spelar ju schack, inte sant?
Hur vet du det?
Ja. Jag har sett det på målningar och hört i visorna.
Ja, jag är verkligen en ganska skicklig schackspelare.
Du kan ändå inte vara skickligare än jag.
Varför vill du spela schack med mig?
Det är min sak.
Det har du rätt i.
Villkoret är att jag får leva så länge jag står dig emot. Spelar jag dig matt, förger du mig. Du fick svart.
Det passar ju bäst så. Inte sant?
Well, you know, I think it's pretty clear that things have changed over time, and that the work that's being done out in the world, you know, that there was a time when I think we felt like we were a little bit alone in the world, that there weren't that many people who were really focusing on image quality. And I think what has changed the most is that all over the world so much amazing work is being done. And you know, if we take a measure of pride in having you know, planted a bit of a flag in the sand on behalf of viewers and saying people really will care if you do this, if we, you know, and holding the line for that. I think the thing that's most amazing is that companies all over the world really have responded to what viewers have said, and viewers have demanded this. I mean, really, more and more people's standards have risen. And at this point, I think the audiences are driving us, you know, and all of our colleagues just as much as, you know, as we're driving with our own intentions. You know, there are whole sites now devoted, obviously, to screen captures and comparing different restorations of things, and we have a much more sophisticated understanding of how films are supposed to look and what a good restoration is and all that kind of stuff. So I think that's one of the major ways that things have changed during the time that we've been doing this. There's another little restoration demonstration piece that we can show. The other thing, I want to watch time. I don't know how much time we have, but yeah, it's 20. Okay, so I do want to make sure that if we have questions, that we have some time for questions. But I had there's a short piece that if anybody's curious, we can show a piece of a restoration demonstration that we did on the Gold Rush. It's something that we worked with the lab here in Bologna on, where the materials are all here, and sometimes I think people don't necessarily recognize what we're doing when we're making these digital restorations, and I often like to say that we're not really actually restoring. You know, when we're making these digital restorations, it's like we're making postcards of a film, not of the film. The film, we have to leave the film in better condition than we found it. We may leave it cleaner than we found it. We may leave it in slightly better physical condition than we found it. But film restoration, celluloid to celluloid, is something different from film restoration in the digital realm. And I shouldn't need to say that here, but I think it's important to acknowledge that we're using that word very loosely now when we talk about a restoration. We're really talking about an image restoration and not a film restoration. But this is a good example of what film really looks like when we find it, and how much work goes into achieving a piece like what you just saw Seventh Seal looking like. This is a piece that was put together for the Gold Rush, and we can roll that. And I guess just to sort of wrap up the presentational part of this, because I think what I really would like to do is open up any questions that there might be about what we do, if anybody's curious to what you'd like to hear us talk about, is just to say that one of the things that is the challenge going forward, as John said, is what does it look like to do this work in an age of readily available digital media, of streaming, when there are, the nice thing about a Blu-ray or a DVD is that it can all be packaged nicely with a nice design and a book and supplemental features that are all readily accessible from a menu and all that kind of stuff. When we're streaming, we're just getting the movie. How do we connect those things together? How are we going to be able to create a coherent experience, a coherent, really cinephile's exploration of a film in an online world? And I feel quite certain that that's going to be the challenge that we are faced with and that we will meet over the coming years. But we have much less control over it than we did, going into DVD or Blu-ray, because when we got started on DVD and Blu-ray, there was a spec, that was designed, and we had no control over that, and we cursed its limitations. But we could live with it. We knew what it was, and we knew how we could use it. It's worth remembering that when we recorded the first commentary tracks on Laserdisc, there were only 2 analog tracks. So you could only record a commentary on a mono film, because the left channel would be playing the soundtrack. And if you wanted to hear the commentary track, you just have it come out of the right speaker. And so I think there are going to be workarounds like that in the beginning, and I think ultimately we are going to be able to make some very interesting ways of presenting things, whether it's on tablets or on televisions. But that is one of the big challenges. The other big challenge is creating a community, and I think the next thing that's on there is just a bunch of other places that Criterion is. You can think if that's what it is, but we've been very actively engaged in just showing, trying to build a community around these films. So whether it's through Facebook and Twitter or through our own website being a place that we are honored to be able to publish many of the writers who are in this room. We want to be a place for cinephiles to come together and to share a set of values about cinema. And so I think that's kind of at the core of what we've been focused on, that and the next generation. So we, in the States, have a Hulu channel that has 900 films streaming all the time for $8 a month. It's a very reasonable value for the true cinephile. And as I think Tony could tell you, there's a lot of things that are on our Hulu channel that are completely unavailable anywhere, anywhere to be seen. Certainly in the States. I mean, there's 46 Kinoshita pictures up there right now, and there I believe are 2 or 3 on DVD in the States. So that is one of the big advantages that we have going into the digital world, is that we can actually make a lot more films available than have ever been available before. I think we should probably just move to questions.
I'd like to just say one thing before. No, totally. On a personal note, I usually don't come out of the closet, right? In the sense of I stay in the office and let Peter be the face of Criterion.
Which I do as little as possible.
But I want to thank him for that. I want to thank Bologna for inviting me and inviting us and doing this, because it really is a treat and an honor to be here. And thank you for all that you do.
I should say a little bit quickly why we don't come out very often. John and I really don't like to come out from behind the brand at all. It's not something that I think is particularly helpful or good for the brand. I think that the idea is that the movies should convey the brand into the world, and then the producers who work on our editions can speak about the editions that they've produced. But I think that the most important thing for us is that the films have to come first, and I think that's, we're very honored and happy to be here. But it's also something that we don't really do very much. So if it's
we were Taylor 10 years ago. 10 years from now, we'll be somewhere else.
But we didn't have to say anything there, right? So anyway, thank you for your patience with us. But does anybody have any questions about?
Well, basically, I used to buy
I hate the past tense of that sentence.
Hello? I used to buy lots of Criterion DVDs. I live in England. Now, I kind of stopped buying Criterion releases because I'm telling myself, I don't want to buy the DVD because one day I might get a North American compatible Blu-ray player. But North American compatible Blu-ray players are difficult and expensive to get hold of. So the question is there any possibility of you either making your Blu-rays region-free, or B, setting up European and possibly Asian subsidiaries who can distribute region B and Asian versions?
Sure. It's not something that we haven't thought about for many years. I think that the chance of us doing region free are very small, because it's not because we want to keep the films from any part of the market. It's just that contractually, when we license a film, we're generally licensing them from a studio, whether it be a European studio or an American studio, that has those rights that are divided up, and we're licensing North America. And as part of, we are contractually bound to do that. So that's not really our choice, that's just something we have to do. And we're respecting the people who have the rights in other territories as well. We have talked about, especially in the UK, where there are less subtitling problems or complications, things like that, launching. Again, it comes to a real problem of having a large enough group to be able to make sense and bring the Criterion Collection over. To be able, if there are 750, 800 movies in the Criterion Collection, and if we could launch 30 or 40 of them, it would be nice for those 30 or 40 films, but it doesn't necessarily make the collection.
And I think, John quickly passed a reason that Europe presents a particular problem. We are all English speakers, but I wouldn't necessarily want to speak to our ability to make really great Italian subtitles or great French subtitles or great Czech subtitles. And so we've really focused on our little market. The other thing is that if you're licensing a French film, the one territory you're probably not going to license it for is France, or an English film for England. And if the whole point of our collection has been to be eclectic and to represent cinema from all over the world, and we do have blind spots which we're constantly trying to address, that's something that is, from the perspective of the States, we're very fortunate. The studios have been very generous with us. We have licenses with every major studio now in the States. So the only place that we truly can represent the breadth of world cinema is North America. So it just represents a problem. The consolation prize is that England does have a wide array of really very impressive publishers that are serving that marketplace. And we collaborate with all of them consistently, whether it's Masters of Cinema or BFI or Artificial Eye or Second Sight. I mean, you guys have an embarrassment of riches over there. I don't know if that's the answer that you wanted to hear.
Well, I was programming Carnegie Hall Cinema and Becker Street Cinema, and actually in 1984 we started to think that we were out because of Turner Television were showing all the film in repertory. We were showing for only $1, but so we went out of business kind of for many reasons. But my question is, and also you were so gentle because Janus Film, I was buying some Cinéas de Notre Temps, and actually Ina didn't have any good material for Jean Renoir's box. They had good material for the interview, but for the stock shot of rules of the game, only Janus Film had very good material, so they said, okay, I think it's you, Jonathan Turrel, who gave me the film for $500, which was great, the negative. So my question is, because a lot of critics and a lot of people ask how much really there is more in the film culture, American, let's say not just the film, American film, you think you can restore, in percentage, they said that on all your on all the American market and culture, and there is only 10% that could be saved. What do you think? With the studio you work, probably, how much more there is to be done?
Are you talking about how many more films could be restored?
Like, really, you have find things all the time, or is it?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's plenty of work to go around for a long time. I think there's a different question about how much of that film is commercially viable. Different question. I will say though, the first repertory film I remember going to was at the Carnegie Hall Cinema, and it was my big brother took me to a double feature of À nous la liberté and Le Million, and it was a very memorable afternoon for me. It was not a common outing, but I very definitely remember it. So I think the real question is commercial viability, and I think there's two different things that are at stake there. You know, we have in the States, we have absolutely no support for what we do, right? It's just a matter of what we can derive from the marketplace, which is why it is so important for us to, when we find a customer, that customer, we have to have that customer with us for life, because it has to be somebody who's willing to watch a film that doesn't fill their widescreen television set, that maybe isn't in color, that maybe isn't in a language that they speak, that maybe was made decades before they were born. And when we find that person, preferably at the age of 17, we want them for the rest of their life. Because once you are the kind of person who cares about that stuff, we want to really serve that person as well as possible. We don't have much market share, but we have a very dedicated audience, and we really want to support them.
Yeah.
But that's the way it works in the States. In Europe, I think there is much more support for film restoration. I wish it were the case that we had more arts support in the States, but it's not going to happen. I mean, not for film restoration, not for theater, not for art restoration, not for any of it. It's just not the way the States is built. But you know, here there is a lot, and I think when you ask the question about particularly American films, you know, some of the heroes of preserving American films are the ones that are coming to this festival right now. I mean, Grover Crisp, you know, or Sean Belston. These are guys who are really keeping their foot on the gas and making sure that their studios are really taking care of their heritage and making sure the films get seen the best way that they can. And it's you know, I think it's really a bold and important thing that they're doing, and they're having to do it in the context of a purely commercial system. And I think it's, you know, I really have to tip my hat to them, because the work that they're doing is amazing, and they're not getting, it's not like the National Endowment of the Arts is giving them a penny. So. You can choose the hands. It's like watching roulette. Where will the ball stop?
I wondered if you could speak about licensing. Just one, I wish you guys could give more notice, because you're losing too many titles too fast, and my wallet is hurting because of it. But I was curious, like with licensing, you know, you always had the statement that we hope to bring it back into the library at some future point in time.
Yeah.
How often does that ever occur?
Usually.
I'm sorry?
Actually, it is usually.
Okay. Okay. And then just, I wondered if you could speak about, I feel like we're kind of in a golden age now where studios have kind of, the market for Blu-ray or DVD, it's not maybe selling as much as it used to. So there's bigger titles, I think, like when Laserdisc was first starting out, and they didn't really catch on yet, the profitability of it. And I feel like now, because the Blu-ray and DVD may be dwindling for classic titles as far as the self-worth. I wondered if you could speak about some of the bigger titles you guys are now getting access to, like On the Waterfront or things like that.
You know, I guess the first question about things going out of print, we hate to see things go out of print. We always try to renew our rights, and we do actually give as much notice as we usually have, because we're gonna keep pressing to renew our rights right up until they end. And it wouldn't be, honestly, in the spirit of the deal for us to announce that things were going out of print, press a whole bunch of copies,
create a market,
dump them in the market, while we're trying to renew rights from somebody. That would just look like we're just honestly trying to screw them, which we aren't. We really are about as upright as you can imagine being in all of our business dealings, because we've been at it for a long time, and it's a very small community of people, and we are going to be back in business with them again and again. So as much as I recognize that it's frustrating when things go out of print, it's just a byproduct of the way the business works. But you know, we lost La Strada and it came back. We lost the Truffauts and they came back. We've lost, you know, things come and go, and they will continue to come and go. And we'll do our best to let people know, you know, as far in advance as we reasonably can.
And we said that the Tatis were one that we took out of print recently, but that are coming back. I mean, so we've let people.
I mean, and when I say usually, it's usually, but sometimes it's usually, 6 years later, and sometimes it's usually 6 months later. Very hard to say. The other question about the larger titles, it's interesting for us because, you mentioned On the Waterfront. What a dream that was for us. We had On the Waterfront, going back to Laserdisc days, was something that we had wanted to work on. And that was a good case of one where that really was driven by the work that Grover had done at Sony. And I think when you say that the market's dwindling or whatever, our market's not actually dwindling so much. We have a very dedicated audience that cares about what we do and they support what we do. And so our sales are actually a little bit up year over year. But it may be that the margins aren't what that for a major studio that is selling a large percentage of its product in places like Walmart and Costco, places that are extremely price sensitive and places where special edition product doesn't necessarily work, that marketplace that a lot of the studios are doing a lot of their main business in may just not be able to support this kind of work. Those are all business decisions that are being made in rooms that we're not in. They know that we stand ready to serve, and we're, but yes, certainly it's a thrill to be able to work on those titles. At the same time, those deals have also opened up the opportunity to pick up some less well-known titles that Grover's done beautiful restorations of La Vérité, of Sundays in Sibel, of Investigation of Citizen Above Suspicion, which was put out here. These are all films that we've wanted to get into the marketplace for a long time. So it's not just the big studio titles that are exciting for us, it's just having those relationships.
It's also something we struggle with because we can only put out a finite number of films. And Peter and I go back and forth on this. But something like On the Waterfront was out. So are we going to take our resources and make something that looks better than it was, but that had been available, and have that take up a spot of something that's not been out on DVD or Blu-ray? And it's a tough choice.
That one wasn't so tough. No, because but it was out, but it was only out on DVD. It had never been out on Blu-ray, and it was just such an interesting story to tell from our perspective.
Hi, I have two questions and two different questions. And the first one is, I'm really amazed about how you create a new language, visual language, with the graphic work that you do for DVD. And there is an art department in Criterion, and I did some research, and if you can talk about this art department, because I think that someone can buy a DVD just for the cover. Are simply amazing. I did that. My wife is very angry for that, but no, really. And because I see that you, there's so many artists that work with Criterion for the cover, and this is amazing, and it's a kind of a drug for me. The other thing is, how much does it cost for you to release a movie, like from the beginning, not like from the DVD now in Blu-ray, but a movie that you restore, and the graphic part, and then I don't have an idea, and I'm very curious about that.
I'll do the second one first.
Okay.
And then we'll come back to the first one. And then I think we should get, so there were some questions in the back, and I'm afraid that they're going to feel that they're not being
There's a woman who's raised her hand
served.
from the very beginning, right there, we got you.
But, so the answer to the question, how much does it cost, is that there's no answer to that question. It very much depends on the release. It could range from something very straightforward, where the film is a fairly modern film, so the restoration cost may be fairly small, but the supplemental costs may be significant. There are some cases where we've decided to make very elaborate booklets, big books with a lot of paper. Paper turns out to be very expensive, and shipping heavy paper turns out to be very expensive. So it really does vary. All I can say is that we've always tried to make sure that we are delivering the best value that we can, and we recognize that our product is expensive, and so we really feel an obligation to deliver on that promise. We've found a place where we've kind of balanced what we're asking of our customers with what we can afford to make at a consistent level of quality, and so that's really the answer. But it could range from, you know, some number of tens of thousands of dollars to some number of hundreds of thousands of dollars. But it's not, you know, it's not millions of dollars, but it's not cheap. On the design side, I'm very glad and pleased that you know, that you've noticed. It's something we're really proud of, and I would also call out our editorial side, because, you know, there's a great moment in Citizen Kane where he's looking in the window of one of the competitors' newspapers, and there's a photograph of all of these award-winning journalists, and then there's a cut, it's a flashbulb cut, and we cut to the inside of a big party, and I think there's like an ice sculpture in the background. All those editors now work for him. And it was, before I came on, I was working in magazines and newspapers. And for me, those designers and those writers, it was always a dream to kind of have an outfit that could design and could write at that level, really publish films, which was what Criterion had been doing all the way along. The original logo actually looked like a book a disc turning into a book. It also looked like a T, very strange. But our art department has done an amazing job, and I think what I credit with the amazing kind of coherence of the art and editorial aspects of our work is this one meeting that we have at the beginning of a project called the brief meeting. And the way that the company is set up, every title has a producer, and every department in the company reports to the producer, who in turn reports up to us. And we really rely on those producers to help define what the story is going to be of the release, and then how do we tell that story in graphic terms. So we're never thinking about it in terms of, oh, well, you've got to have, you know, Enuka May on the cover because she's beautiful. You have to have Marcello on the cover because he's beautiful. You have to have all of them on the cover because they're beautiful. You know, what we're really saying is, what is the film about, and how can we communicate what the film is about? And sometimes that means coming up with a whole new synthetic image, and we'll hire an illustrator. And sometimes it means, well, there's that it just has to be that shot. But it's really a matter of again, an extension of the mission. How can you present the film as in a way that you're actually really communicating the film itself? It all comes from the film. We actually have a little montage of covers that we'll set running, when you guys are all leaving. We done? Do you want to do that one more?
She's got to go.
The poor woman back there has been raising her hand patiently the whole time. Can she ask her one question? There she is.
Go ahead.
Oh, now there's three. Oh, that's one.
Hi, I was just wondering how you choose new films for your collection, and whether it's a personal or quite a democratic process.
There's no democracy.
Oh, so not true, actually. There actually is, because Peter gets outvoted all the time. So
I didn't say that there is a tyranny either. No, it's not that we have the run of every film that's made. That's what I mean. It's not like we get to vote. It's not in that way that we get to choose from everything. There certainly are cases where someone has to be passionate about a film. And it doesn't have to be me. It doesn't have to be John. There are a half dozen people certainly in this room that I'm looking at who work at Criterion, all of whom have advocated for one film or another joining the collection. So whether it's, obviously there are some filmmakers that we've shown a real dedication to. We love working with Wes Anderson. We've been very proud of our recent association with Lena Dunham. We're very happy with her success in the world. We've been loving, all the way along working with all of Jim Jarmusch's films. And I think, there are filmmakers that, Alexander Payne knows that I'm dying to work on one of his films sometime soon. I hope that will happen. There are a lot of filmmakers we'd like to be working with that we just haven't had the opportunity to work with yet. And then there are some other filmmakers whose films are actually really well served by beautiful editions that are already in the marketplace, and we'll just feel like, that as much as we'd like to work on that film, it doesn't necessarily need us as much as something else does. But it's not a science by any means. And this is true of all of our licensing. It's not that we just get to identify all the best films in the world and just say, I'll take all of them. I'll take one of each. We can't do that. We're working within a set of parameters that is the companies that will do business with us, the things that are available to us, the filmmakers who like to do this kind of thing. So it's a very impure science, but the main fact is that somebody within the scheme of the company has to really be a passionate supporter of the film, and has to be able to make the case that the film is an exemplary film of its kind. And we try not to be too snobby about what kinds of films are okay. Thank you.